Hi, Tracy.
Hey Rama, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Sorry for joining late. I didn't have the invite in my calendar, so looking for the Zoom link.
Oh yeah. No worries. I did the same thing.
Huh. I think Arun said he would join for the first half hour.
Yep.
We can just wait for him just a minute. I think it probably can be done half an hour. I just wanted to, I think the last time we discussed, we went over all the items. So I was just uh, listing them separately and classifying them into mandatory badges and optional or good to have badges. Mandatory ones being those that are required for some kind of state transition in the life cycle diagram, and optional
Mm-hmm.
are something that projects can flash, just showing that they're mature projects, but otherwise won't necessarily have a bearing on decisions made about the project's transitions. So
Okay.
um, let me I'll share my screen. Just give me a second.
Okay.
I'll just message Arun in case he's forgotten about it.
Sounds good.
Okay, so this is what I have here. I think I just marked using color coding. Um, the I'm not sure. I mean, whether to treat this as. I mean, in place of infrastructure, we decided that there are different parts of a project infrastructure that we can track using separate metrics, and we just instead have an accepted criteria for for a badge. Do you think I was just thinking about that again, and it seems like kind of a given that a project would be accepted, right, if it enters a life cycle? So do you think we
Yes.
explicitly need to call it out?
I think we can obviously categorize them as labs or top level projects. So I think that's I don't think it's really necessary. I just think that some people might only be interested in the top level projects and some people might be interested in both.
Yeah,
So I think in whatever way we decide to display this stuff, um, if it's on a dashboard for all of the projects or something like that, and the labs, then we should be able to filter by top level projects versus labs.
got it. Then maybe you should call it a maybe a project uh, level or something, right? And level indicating whether it's a lab or a full project.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Just mark it. Okay. Just want to. Oh, sorry. Before this, I just wondered if you knew what happened to the recording of the previous conversation. When I think in the last call we had was September 29th, Arun stopped recording and then I started recording, but I can't find it anywhere in YouTube. Is it? Did I
We
make
might
any
have,
mistake? Yeah.
no, we might have to reach out to Rye, and see where it's at. Sometimes those things get a little weird on the Zoom side of the house. So we just might have to reach out and, see if we can get it from him.
Rai has an
If-
automated script that just automatically uploads to YouTube, right? After the call is over.
Yeah, but it might have some exceptions for like what we just did, right? Where we stopped the recording and then started it.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I think we just probably reach out to him and see if we can make sure that we get that.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be good to have. Uh, okay. So let me just go through these badges. The reason I marked them optional were because we were just, as you were making notes, I mentioned that we would either, either this required more discussion or it required us to wait for other task forces, or they were kind of subjective and we did not have a very precise mechanism to determine whether project met this criteria. So like uh, whether not a project is reusing components uh, as needed from other projects rather than maybe reinventing the wheel, something that another project has already done. It's going to be very challenging to find this out, even manually, let alone in an automated manner. So I think just put this here in as a candidate badge that can be issued to a project based on some procedure we can institute in the TOC that says a project can seek this, and then if an inspection, it can take a while to inspect the project for this. If an inspection yields no overlap with another project, then it can be issued such a badge. So that's generally my criteria for all of these here. So you think that will work?
Yeah, I think that'll work. I mean, we could also tie it to the annual review cycle too, such that it's something that, if the team wants, they can request it during the annual review cycle, and then somebody can take a deeper dive into that.
Yep, that's a great point. Okay. I think CI/CD automation, I think both of those, it kind of, maybe we'll see what the automated pipelines task force comes up with before making call on them. Because I'm not sure again uh, how to check this. I think CI/CD is sort of like the fact that project should have it. It's a very basic thing, but it's
Yeah,
sort of like the acceptance criteria we're talking about. Other than that, how well a project does it is kind of subjective.
sure. Yeah, makes sense.
You
Do
think
we
that
have,
yeah.
do we have two badges, one that's just CI/CD implemented and then the other as to whether it follows the best practices? And the
There
best
is a
practices one could be optional and the CI/CD one could be the mandatory?
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm just wondering if the CI/CD is covered by testing. We have a badge called testing. Do you think it's not necessary, right? I mean, projects, I mean, different modules can have testing, but they may not necessarily be doing the CI/CD in a sustainable way. So
Yeah, yeah.
sorry, what is the other thing? There's the fact that it has it, and then another one about you talk
Whether
about the
it
level.
meets whether it meets the best
It
practices
means the best practice. Right.
that have been defined, whatever those are going to be.
Yeah. I think the questionnaire that Peter has, do you think that will shed any light on best practices? I mean, I think it's kind of like a survey, right? Asking
Yeah.
for what people are using. But from that, I actually wanted to ask Peter about this, but ran out of time. Uh, exactly what recommendations are we going to glean from the result of the survey? Do you know?
No, I do not know, and it's a good question.
Okay. I imagine it will be like we'll maybe we can determine which which options are the that is listed are probably useful to cover in CI/CD, and if particular projects are covering those, or they have instituted those, then yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm not, I'm just thinking aloud. Maybe
Yeah,
we'll just
no,
wait for yeah.
it's very possible, right, that those are the ones that Peter then digs in further on, based on the survey results.
Right. Okay. Maybe we'll wait for his okay. I think automation usability is this also may have some overlap with CI/CD really, but this also kind of subjective. So I think maybe we can it's possible. I mean, maybe we can just combine these two into following best practices, I guess, right?
Yeah, it looked like the usability one was more about, can somebody get up running quickly with the project, right, from like a developer perspective or from a user
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah,
So I mean, I think that's a very, like, you actually have to go follow the instructions and see if that's the case, right? There's nothing that you could do to say, oh, look, automation has been done. So yeah, I think leaving it where it's at as the optional and having it something that that somebody looks at in the annual review cycle is probably the appropriate sort of steps here.
yeah. No, that's great. I think that's kind of what I was thinking about earlier, but yeah, you captured it very well. And I think we have the documentation badge, but you can probably say that uh, this doesn't necessarily cover the subjective criteria of usability. So, in documentation, it's more about whether we have the project has enough documentation for users to understand what the project is about and how to get a handle on the code and the samples.
Mhm.
Other than that, this is more of a, yeah, I mean, this is, as you say, more subjective.
Yeah, yep.
Conformity, I think, do you think we should put it in mandatory, or you think it's okay here? I think that'll be more relatively easier to measure than some of the other criteria.
Yeah, is that, what is the definition of this again?
The look and feel of the repository and the documentation.
Yeah, so this is probably a bit towards the common repository structure that we have as well, right? Does it have a maintainer's file? Yeah, there's parts of it that I think could be automated, but there's parts of it that probably can't. Like, are those maintainers the right maintainers?
Yeah.
Just because you have a maintainer's file doesn't mean that it actually has the correct content in it. Something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, maybe it is better in the optional for now, for somebody to actually go take a look at it and make sure it makes sense.
Okay. But something you said, I think, which we can probably separate out from here, which is, does the project have the basic uh, core pieces that we want all projects to have, like the security SPOC, RFCs, maintainer file, and so on. Maybe we should just call it something separate than conformity. Should be
Okay. Like a common, we could
uh,
just call it common repository structure, I think is what we call it in our guidelines or our governance or whichever it falls under. I could go look at that.
maybe we can call it hyperledger structure. Hyperledger repository structure.
Yeah, I must have it guidelines. Yeah, under guidelines, we call it common repository structure. So yeah, you could put Hyperledger in front of that. That'd be good.
Call it hyperledger repository structure.
That's fine.
Sounds good. The responsiveness and engagement, this kind of overlaps with the diversity or the decentralization badge, in that we're trying to make sure that there's an active and distributed community. But I think it's somewhat more subjective than just having a diverse community engaged in it. It's more about how well are the project's main maintainers uh, working with the community to ensure that everything's happening transparently, and that people are feeling, at least people who are not core to the project, are feeling included when they want to maybe make some contribution to the project, or even just use it.
Yep. Which is definitely subjective.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think you're fine with this, right? This, what we have here and what we have here.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
No? Okay. So maybe I thought next thing we could do, and we can do it for today, and then we can close the call, would be just look at which projects are required for which stages. So I'm just going to look at the. I'm just going to take this diagram as is for now. We kind of discussed whether we should keep I think the deprecated stage were the too many, but I think for now all of these states have their logic, so maybe we'll just keep them, and we can figure out which states need which badges. So I think the legal badge is needed for all, right? I think that should be an easy criterion.
Um, Yes, I think so.
The diversity badge, I'm just wondering if we need it for, I mean, it's all projects uh, in a top level, but not necessarily for labs, right?
So our incubation doesn't currently require it.
Okay,
So right now, the only one that currently requires that is graduated.
okay. I think, yeah, that's a good point. But even incubation, I think, requires at least two, right?
I can't remember if we actually say anything about incubation. Let's see if I can find anything.
Okay, because I thought, at least this is what I heard from somebody a few years ago, was a lab project can be launched by a single institution with a TOC sponsor, whereas a
Mhm.
full project requires at least two companies to be incubated, and of course, it needs sponsorship as well. Graduation requires three. I think that's the
So,
current
so
criteria.
so currently the project incubation entry criteria says that the project should have multiple maintainers. The maintainers need not be from different companies. However, having maintainers from different companies is seen as a positive sign. Proposals with only one maintainer have been rejected. So the difference is you could have two maintainers and they could be from the same company, and it might be accepted, but it doesn't recognize, it doesn't say anything about whether or not the incubation has to be from different companies.
Okay, and we should keep it that way.
Yeah, I think that's fine. The other piece of this does say that, there's a sponsors list um, in the incubation criteria, like in
Yeah.
the proposal. Like it does say that the project should have the backing of more than one organization. But again, that's a should, not a must. So yeah, I think it's probably right now our criteria is just for graduated that they have the diversity criteria.
Just trying to codify this. Let's see if this works.
Yep.
Does it make sense? I think if a project is deprecated on the dormant stage, it's at that point we don't really care about how many maintainers there. But of course, if they want to go to graduated again, then it requires three independent institutions.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Release, I think this is also mandatory for graduated, right?
Yes,
Not necessarily for others.
that's correct.
Do you think it's fine? So if there's a lab that wishes to get to the incubated stage, then we will consider whether or not they've been following the release practice. But it's not a mandatory thing.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think as long as it's a soft criteria, then that's okay.
I think let me just explicitly state so I have that here. Okay, penalty for non-compliance. This is I was initially going to just write downgrade, but I think there's a discussion we had with the TOC maybe a month ago where people thought this needed to be discussed with the Linux Foundation legal staff and would have to be judged on a case by case basis. But perhaps you can just say non non-compliance should result in a downgrade unless the maintainers can provide solution or the legal yes, can we just say this? Like we generally will it will result in a downgrade unless there are some mitigating circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
For diversity, again, non-compliance. How would we downgrade a graduated project? Would be you downgrade to incubation, right? If it
Yeah,
incubated, if it loses.
I think that's the appropriate step.
Release, I think probably the same criteria here for release. Or sorry, not if make it if it is not.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Or should we? I mean, since we have the dormant or deprecated stage, should we call it a dormant project if it is not following release guidelines?
Mm, I think it
Because
could
I
go
guess
to yeah, I think it could go to either actually. You know, I look at something like cello,
yeah,
right? I mean, it's not a graduated project. It is an incubated project where they've been working on their 1.0 release though for like a year, right? So I'm wondering, like, it doesn't make sense to move it to dormant per se because there is actual work going on. It's just slow. So I think it's an interesting one.
okay.
Because I really think it depends. Some projects, yes, right? If they're not even working, then definitely it should go to dormant. But if they are working on trying to accomplish their goals and it's just taking a while, then I think incubation makes a lot of sense.
This makes sense?
Mhm. Yep.
Yep. Thanks. Testing. I think should we also call this mandatory for graduated, or do you think it's necessary for even for an incubating projects?
I think that it is mandatory for graduated. For incubation, I would say that it's somewhat soft. You know, I could see a newly incubated project that hasn't actually got the test set up yet, and we would be okay with that. You know, maybe if it's a project that's looking to graduate, we wouldn't be so okay with that. But yeah, to me, it's a bit softer when it comes to incubation.
Okay. The penalty is, I think, back to incubation, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Because it indicates, I think, my reading of this indicates that both dormant and replicated represent a lower level of activity, but not a lower level of maturity, whereas incubation may have represent a high level of maturity or sorry, activity, but low level of maturity. So
Yep,
testing
yep,
reflects maturity.
yep. I would agree with that.
Documentation, I think, is probably the same, right, as testing.
Yeah, I would say it's the same as testing.
And I think we can say downgrade to incubation again.
Yep. Yeah, I think you know, think about like new features being added. If you're not adding those documentations for those features, then that's probably a sign of a bit of immaturity, if you will.
Yeah. Apologies, I have a phone call. Let me just take it. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay. So level, I think yeah, this is sort of mandatory for all pages by definition, right? I mean, it just says
Yes.
we just saying what the project is. If this is not relevant, open SSF again. This is mandatory for if you graduated. Yeah, I think that should be fine, right? I mean, if it's not meeting the practices, we are going to, I think we want to push it back to incubation then, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think what this implies though is that people have to they have to basically maintain that open SSF badge. My thinking is that right now what's happening is people are doing it when they go to graduate, and then that was the last time they look at it.
Okay.
So I don't know how we, you know, basically do the refresh, if you will, right? Make sure that people
Yeah.
have gone through and, you know, done the evaluation over again. But I do think that's a necessary step for us to figure out how to get people to, you know, refresh what they answered the first go around. See
Yeah.
if it's still accurate.
Security, I think this is kind of more critical in the sense that all projects should have a security SPOC, right? It's not just about graduation. I mean, projects
Yeah,
in any stage.
yeah, I think so too. I think that labs is probably a little bit softer just because it is an experimental state, but I do think that they should have thought about how they are going to deal with security issues. So
Yep,
my
that makes
guess is
sense.
that a lot of them haven't even thought about it, would be my guess.
Yeah. And the penalties for non-compliance, I think maybe make it deprecated, I'd imagine.
Yeah, yep.
Yes. And should we then also have a deprecated to end of life? If it doesn't. Also, if the maintenance don't take any steps.
Mm-hmm. And is it the same for incubation as well? Is it graduated and incubation that go to deprecate it?
So both incubated and graduated will go to deprecated, and deprecated will go to EUL.
Yep.
Okay, makes sense.
And maybe for,
Okay. Yeah.
well, since it's softer for labs, it's probably not a big deal. I think the bigger deal is if a lab does get a security issue and they don't address it, then it should be an archived lab.
Sorry, then it should be what?
Archived,
Oh,
basically end of life. Yep.
I think these are, we can probably leave this for now because they're not mandatory. We can come back to them if we have more information from the
Okay.
other task force. Production, I think this is kind of an easy thing to inspect. So we can probably say it's what's the mandatory for graduated, or was it also like a, I think so far it's a uh, soft criteria, right? That it should have production use.
Yeah, I don't think we even have it like mandatory for graduated, but I think it probably should be.
Okay,
I think
let
that's
me
a
put
change
it,
that we should make.
sure. Let me just put this here and then we can ask the TOC about it.
Yep.
And I mean, once it's been used, it can't be taken away, right? So I don't think there's a downgrade is
Well,
relevant
I
here.
mean, I don't know. What if somebody was using the version 1, but they never upgraded to version 2?
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one, right? Because you're right. It's kind of like if they were using it, they were using it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Do you think this makes sense? It's kind of related to the releases as well. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think that kind of covers this. Yeah, I can then, I think next step, I can just create a fresh draft with, I'll just make the list of the things that, or the mandatory badges we have. And for optional, I can just have a note saying what we are waiting on. And then I'll list out the project transition criteria based on the badges, as we have been, whatever we have been listing in these two columns. And
Okay,
I think we
sounds
can
good.
go with that in the, yeah, I think this week Bobby's talking, so I think next week I can talk about this in the TOC meeting.
All right, sounds like a plan.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Tracy. Stay there.
All right. Yep. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.